Howdy y'all, I'm Ice Gold, and today I've got a topic that I've been thinking about a little bit recently, and I mean you might have been thinking about it too, especially with the new World of Wallaru coming out, and with the recent release of this World of Wallaru, there's been a lot of talk surrounding the world's difficulty, and it got me thinking about how KingsIsle has sort of written themselves into a corner with how hard they can make every new world, and the difference between your average casual player and your hardcore min-maxer just became a hell of a lot bigger, and I think it's good to talk about this. Ever since the spring of 2022, when Merciless gear got buffed and became the de facto best set gear set to farm for, the Catacombs and its Dragoon gear became pretty much worthless outside of maybe having the amulet on, a life or a death if we either didn't have our lore AoEs or were rightfully concerned about getting Archmastery diffed by our own teammates when playing in a group. And Dragoon gear was already extremely grindy, and the only people that have it are the people who played back when it was still the best for a whopping 2 years and a few months. What this has led to is most casual players, and even many hardcore players who don't want to spare time at 130, will just use Darkmoor gear all the way from level 100 to level 170. And Darkmoor gear obviously isn't bad, but depending on your school, you might not get nearly enough damage to make the 4th arc as much of a breeze as it is for the people who have plenty of, Dragoon, Merciless, and Eon gear stocked up for their other characters. Starting in around here in Lemuria, every street mob you fight is going to have, universal resist, with a few exceptions. Your average player's Darkmoor gear is not going to give enough offensive stats to really be in the greatest position, and this will really show as you progress into Novus. Now, I am all for having worlds be a bit more difficult so players have to really use their brains, but it's become very evident, especially with Wallaru, that these more recent worlds have been somewhat tailored to the players who were already max level at the previous world before they dropped. And we saw that Lemuria was difficult on release because the mobs and bosses had better stats than before, and our stats were definitely not what they are now, but it was still very manageable even if you didn't have Dragoon or Uber gear. Novus, though easily a fundamentally more difficult world, was honestly less of a problem because Merciless gear made most of it trivial. Even Darkmoor gear with a good pet could reasonably get you through, because the damage difference wasn't just crazy insane like it is now. And then when Eon gear got its rework this spring, when it lost its shads in favor of pip chance and all that, Merciless gear also got its second buff at the same time. So, at the very least, people who didn't want to farm Novus, and rightfully so, farming in this world sucked, they could just use Merciless gear going forward and only have about 5 to 10-ish less damage, maybe 3 to 5 less pierce, that type of thing. But 5 schools were easily hitting 200 damage with, Merciless and Eon, and a 6th could hit it if they had every piece of gear that they needed for it. Obviously being life, if you had a Frivolous Orc combo and all that, you could get there. And the 7th, my main school Ice, came very close. The difference in damage suddenly got much, much wider, and the devs' balancing of newer content really reflects that. So that leads us to Wallaru. In its first rendition on Test Realm, those of you who watched my streams from that week saw that the mobs were pitifully easy with my fully maxed out gear sets. Like even easier than Novus, and the new spells that we got could easily one-round most of the mobs without any buffs, and the world honestly felt like a pushover. And that first week was something that honestly any casual with Darkmoor gear could easily solo. And the Ergs weren't insane yet. The only boss that really gave anyone trouble was when people tried to solo the last Freddy encounter unprepared, and nothing really had more than 25 resist, and it honestly felt too easy. But when you combine that with these new damage tools, and you're looking at an extremely easy time soloing any content that, looks like that from that point forward. But all of that changed on the second week of Test Realm, and the developers heard from a lot of people that, we thought the world was too easy. So they absolutely cranked the difficulty up like crazy, and most of what they did made it to Live Realm. You've got a lot more elites have become bosses, like Matilda Kali in one of the first quests here. Used to be an elite, but is now a boss right here in Bing Bang Boomerang. And if you were a hardcore min-maxer like I am, it was still very doable and not super unreasonably hard as a solo player, even though the Erks were extremely tough and had their health quadrupled in some instances. But for the casual players, however, I can think of 6 fights in Wallaru off the top of my head that would stonewall even the most competent players with Dartmoor gear. Those being Zolomon out in KingsIsle, who will put a minus 25% weakness on you for every buff that you use, so you're constantly hitting at only 75% power. The Desperation Urk, who would, you know, just enfeeble your blades and put up massive absorbs for your feints. The double arcane toads out in Wabagong territory, and those are honestly kind of self-explanatory. I mean, 2 Freddies at the same time, it's not very fun. The Despair Urk, who, like, honestly just counters everything. You can't feint stat because it'll swap it back to you. You can't blade because it'll enfeeble you, and it'll constantly just V-plague you at the same time, so it's like, you know, what do you do there? And then there was also Morp out in the Eucalyptus Forest, who, you know, if you don't kill her in 3 hits, she just forces you out of combat. Like, she just, like, says, you're done. And, you know, you have to kill her in 3 hits, which is hard for some schools. Like, my life especially, I had to straight up go for 1 in a million against her in order to hit through her, you know, minus 80 set shield and 30% samurai shield and her brace and shadow sentinel and all that at the same time, so it was just really rough. And the last one that I can really think of is Mr. Kane out in Billabong Resort, who you have to do a very specific amount of damage in order to win. Because, you know, if you kill Mr. Kane before you kill the hostages, or you overkill the hostages, then, you know, he revives them, puts the restraints back on, and, you know, you're back to square one. It's like you might as well have just not hit, and you have to reset after that. And there's more that I didn't immediately think of, but the average casual is going to have a very, very hard time in this world, and there's instances where they either can't team up, like for the Arcs, or they can, but they'll still get demolished due to the extremely high damage output and a tendency to counter regular gameplay, like Morp and the Arcane Toads. This is the problem that KingsIsle is now facing. Should they design new content based on the min-maxers to make things be less of a cakewalk, or should they tailor it to the casuals so that they can progress and advance at the cost of new worlds being complete pushovers? And with the new jewels and gear templates in Wallaru, as I've said a bunch of times by now, the difference between the average casual who gets by with Dartmoor gear and the sweaty min-maxer, like myself, has grown to such an insane margin, it's wild. I think that the best way to finally put this to rest for the 5th arc and beyond is for this next post-arc dungeon, if they decide to do that, to just throw caution to the wind when it comes to stats getting too high like they did in Dartmoor. Crank up the health. Crank up the damage. Let people easily pass 250 damage. Let Ice and Life hit 20k health. Just go all out with it so everyone rolling through later down the line has to stop with this level 170 dungeon like they do with, you know, Olympus, Waterworks, and Darkmoor. Some household names at this point in the game. And I get that the devs are kind of letting the yearly raid releases fill this niche, and the Nullity template is supposedly returning with the next one, but with how complex and hard raids are, they're really just nowhere near as accessible to casual players as Darkmoor and Waterworks were. And I honestly don't like the idea of increasing stats even more, but in the name of erasing the stat difference, my take is that this next post-arc dungeon needs to do all this so the player base has the best stats for the 5th arc, so it can be, you know, not a complete pushover. It's like, it's not just Mickey Mouse world after Mickey Mouse world like it kind of was in the 4th arc. But yep, that is going to wrap up. Let me know if you, I guess, liked the ideas. I mostly am making this video just to start some discussion on the topic, because really and truly, you know, it's like, Wallaru, I might have thought it was at the appropriate difficulty, but, you know, other players and more casual players I've seen in my comment section and on the subreddit and on Twitter and all that, they're all saying, like, you know, maybe maybe this world shouldn't be super duper hard, and I think I can understand that, and I don't want to leave them out. I don't want it to get to a point where it's like, you know, you have to farm every world every 10 levels, which is sort of where we're at right now. And when the Nightmare comes out in January, it's gonna happen again, you know, so. But yeah, thank y'all for watching. I've been Ice Gold. Be sure to like, subscribe, and leave like 50 comments for the algorithm, and I'll see y'all later.